gums at each other any chance they get. The fight clock is brought to you by Modelo.
It's time
for you to sit back, relax, and listen to a complete and fucking utter armchair expert give his completely and utterly useless opinions on the one hell of an amazing sport that is MMA.
G'day, guys. Of course, we are having the periodic monthly MMA Quick Chat episode because it is indeed that time of the month again, baby. UFC 298, Volkanovski versus Topuria for the featherweight championship of the world from the Honda Center in Anaheim, California. But first, we've got to talk about and recap UFC 297, and I may as well do it off the rip because there's not really a lot to talk about except for Sean Strickland. So let's talk about it. First of all, it was an extremely long card. I was watching it at 5 o'clock in Australia. It started, I think, about 4:57 p.m. Sean Strickland was making his walkout. And I'm like, man, this has got to be the longest UFC card I've ever seen. I haven't checked, but I'm guessing every fight on the card must have gone to decision. It was, and when you're bloody paying, $29 for a beer and some lunch, the day gets very long at that point. But as to the fight, look, it was extremely close. It honestly could have gone either way. Ultimately, it went to Dricus, and he is now your new undisputed UFC middleweight champion of the world. Look, I did think Sean won, as did Dana, apparently, but it is what it is. They probably won't give him the rematch. A lot of people are clamoring to see it happen, but the UFC is all about the money fights, and unfortunately they'll look to probably make the fight that I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's a shame because, as I said, you probably could turn Sean Strickland into a draw, just purely based off the way he talks. He definitely does have a following. You probably could turn that into a draw with the right amount of push, but, the UFC likes to focus on their money-making stars, which is why they're probably going to go with the match that was set up all the way back in, I think, July last year at UFC 290 when he walked in the cage and started saying the N-word after his fight with Robert Whittaker, which we'll probably talk about later on in the podcast. DDP versus Izzy. DDP actually called him out after the fight. I did think that they were going to try and set it up for 300, but UFC 300, that is. But it doesn't appear they're going to go that way. They may try and set it up on a big card with Conor or something later in the year, which I will get to as well. We'll talk about that later. But there's one other thing I want to talk about in regards to Izzy before we get off the topic and I talk about UFC 298. I don't know if I talked about this in prior podcasts, so if I did, I'm sorry. But I watched a video some time ago, maybe a month or two ago, and it showed me again the Izzy versus Strickland fight from UFC 293 where Izzy got dominated, and it was revealed that the video of Izzy masturbating a dog and the whole Chinaman thing came out and all that kind of stuff, and Izzy did not look in a... Looking back now, Izzy did not look in a good headspace during that press conference, and, man, maybe it should have been an indicator, to be honest. But I didn't know this happened until this particular video showed me a close-up of it. He went up... Izzy, this is... went up to Sean Strickland and asked him and asked him to not talk about his dog. Like, this is the man who laid on the floor mocking the child of one of his biggest rivals. And granted, the child somewhat had it coming because the child had done it to him during one of their previous fights, so it was a bit of a receipt for that. But, this is the man who did that. This is the man who raw-dogged one of his opponents, humped him on live pay-per-view, and he wants to go up and say, please don't talk about my dog because of the video. Like, come on, man. Like, isn't that a bit of the pot calling the kettle black? Like, you can dish it out, but you can't take it. Yeah, I don't know what to think of Izzy at this point. Like, part of me does really respect him for his championship reign and all that kind of stuff, and some of the other stuff that he's done and said. Particularly, I think it was after the Costa fight, he went on a speech about anti-bullying and all that kind of stuff, and that really struck a chord with me, given my history. Yeah, man, I just don't know what to think of that. That really sort of rubbed me the wrong way when I heard that. I was like, oh man, like, whereas Volk, well, we'll talk about Volk. Volk, is all class even in loss, as I spoke about. He posted with Islam and encouraged the haters to stop hating on Islam and bigged him up. Say what you want, call it excuses or whatever. Volk is all class. Izzy's kind of like, I don't know, man. I just don't know what to think of it. It kind of rubbed me up the wrong way when I heard that. So I don't know what to think of Izzy at this point. Is he going to come back? If so, is he going to be the same? I don't know. There was a lot of talk of him being on 300, which, as we'll talk about, 300's kind of up in the air at the moment. UFC 300. I mean, we've talked about it for months at this point, but really, who knows where UFC 300 is going to go. But anyway, guys, going to take a quick break. And when we come back, let's talk UFC 298. I wanted to speak about one other thing, just on that other topic I was talking about, Sean Strickland, just before I get to UFC 298. I listen, you might call me crazy for this, but I listen to Chael Sonnen, and one of his theories about championship fights is that usually, by and large, they go to the champion, even if they are close. And usually, in my experience, that is what's supposed to happen. Which is why I did question the first... sorry, not just go to the champion, but also there is a hometown advantage. Which is why I did question the first Volk-Islam fight. Like, if anything, I thought it might have gone to Volk just because it was in his hometown and because, Islam really, it was close, but anyway, long story short, that's another reason why I thought it might have gone to Sean, but anyway, it didn't. Just wanted to put that in there because I forgot to address it the first time around, and I thought I should. But anyway, UFC 298, Volk versus Topuria. Definitely a very stacked card indeed. A couple of Aussie guys on there. Justin Tarfa's on the prelims. I thought I did hear Bam Bam was supposed to be on it, but I haven't heard anything else about that since. But definitely there is... Let me just look it up, as we always do during these videos. UFC 298. Okay, so yes. All right, we're getting somewhere. There's the UFC website. That's the one we love the most. Definitely a very cold looking picture on the UFC website of this card. Let me see. I'm just gonna look through. Oh yes, hold on. There's another one worth talking about. Okay, as far as I could see, Bam Bam is not on it. Which is unfortunate. I did hear that he was supposed to be on it, but there is 3 fights. Actually 4 fights I mainly want to talk about. Merab Divish, oh God, don't even ask me to try and pronounce his name, versus Triple C, Henry Cejudo. Jeff Neal versus Ian Mikado Gary, one of the most hated men in the UFC at this point because of the antics of his wife. And then we get to the business end. It's a 4 main card. It's a 4 fight main card. Co-main event in the middleweight division. Robert Bobby Knuckles Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. It seems Paulo hasn't pulled out. It seems as if the fight's going ahead. And then, of course, as I've said, the main event, Alexander the Great Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria for the 145 division title. Now, I do want to talk about Merab versus Triple C very quickly because Triple C has said that he will 100% retire if he loses this weekend. Now, I believe... Let me see. Okay. All right, so sorry, I'm just working out the betting signs that are on the... I always get these confused. So they're saying Merab is the favorite in the Henry Cejudo fight. As I said, Triple C has said that he will retire if he loses on the weekend. I hope he doesn't. I've always liked him. You know, he was a dominant fighter, and you know he's gone on to train a couple of people since. Seems like he knows what he's doing. So I do hope for all the best for him. They're saying Ian Gary is the favourite against Jeff Neal, the Irishman. I'm sure Conor will be jumping up and down if he wins. You know, Conor doesn't really mind a bit of hate, even though he might disagree with his wife's antics, but it is what it is. Now, Bobby Knuckles. This is interesting. Bobby Knuckles versus Paulo Costa. They're saying Bobby Knuckles is the favourite. Now, this is interesting because a lot of people... So, okay, let me just clarify this. Rank 2 versus Rank 3, Triple C versus Merab. Rank 8 versus Rank 10. So there's bantamweight for Triple C and Merab. That's a bantamweight bout. Welterweight bout, which is obviously 170. Jeff Neal versus Ian Mikado Gary. So 2 and 3, 8 and 10. Okay, the co-main event, Bobby Knuckles versus Paulo Costa, is 3 versus 6. Rank 3 versus rank 6. So this is very interesting. But as I was saying, they're saying that Bobby Knuckles is the favorite to beat Paulo Costa. This is interesting because a lot of people are saying that Costa's going to win. And I didn't get it at first because Costa's been on kind of a skid. But then I remembered Bobby Knuckles' prior fight at, I think, funnily enough, UFC 290 last year, as I said, against DDP, in which he got fucking smashed. Now, my mate either has got or will be putting a multi on backing Costa to win. So for his sake, I hope Bobby Knuckles' chin got cracked in that fight. I do hope Bobby Knuckles, myself, I do hope Bobby Knuckles gets to come back. You know, it'd be interesting seeing perhaps go for the belt again. You know, the Aussie champ. Be interesting. Would he come across Whittaker? Would he come across Izzy again? Who knows? Really, it's hard to pick that fight for myself. It does depend on how Bobby Knuckles is from the last fight. If he's still feeling the side effects and he's perhaps getting to the point of being done, I reckon Paulo takes it. But if not, honestly, who knows? Either way, it's going to be interesting. But which leads us to the main event. Now, first and foremost, there's one other thing I want to just chat about before we get to the featherweight title bout, which is the main event of the evening. Earlier in the week, my mate sent me a video made by Sportsbet, which always make funny bloody ads and all that sort of stuff. It was Volk acting in the video, pretending he's an old man, because, you know, everyone's saying, oh, he's lost twice now, he's done, blah, blah, blah. I certainly hope not, but man, it was a funny video. I very nearly shared it on our socials. Speaking of which, once I get done with this podcast, I'll have to go on our socials and put on all the press conference videos for the story highlights, because they're apparently interesting. But yeah, that video was 100% very funny, as they always are from Sportsbet, which leads me into my next point, the press conference, which was yesterday. First of all, Volk, there's two main points from it. I haven't watched it, but there's two, to me, unless I'm missing something, unless, you know, Ian Mercado Gary got roasted or something, which a lot of people were hoping for. There's to me, when it comes to the main event, there's two main points from the press conference. And look, maybe I am missing something, and if I am, I'm sorry, but I decided to do this podcast without watching the press conference in full, which I probably should have done. But you know me, guys, I don't watch press conferences much unless I know for a fact they're going to be interesting. But Volk wore the old man suit to the press conference. Acted like he was falling asleep on stage. I saw in a photo. Oh, mate, he's mate, he's showing he can be funny when he wants to be, man. I love it. But he's you know, styling on him. You know, he's like Izzy said. That's one thing I did agree with. I saw a quote from Izzy. It's time to remind everyone just how dominant Volk's been, and hey, he's gonna rub it in everyone's faces if he wins, which I sure hope he does. But the second thing I did want to mention is Ilia took a leaf out of the Conor McGregor Jose Aldo handbook and took the title and ran with it at the press conference. And Volk, unlike Aldo though, Volk just sat there calm and composed, which I don't know what that means. Is Ilia in Volk's head? Who knows? Is Volk just calm and composed and not affected like Alexander Usyk is against Tyson Fury? I don't know, but we shall see. They have the odds pretty much even for this fight, which tells you just how close it is. No one can really pick. A lot of people are thinking, oh, Leah's going to wash Volk. Volk's done. Hey, we'll see. And if Volk wins, like I hope he does, I'm sure he's going to style on everyone and let everyone know who the king at featherweight still is. But anyway, guys, definitely going to be looking forward to watching it on Sunday. It's going to be a stacked card. Definitely more stacked than UFC 297 was. Going to be watching it from not my local pub, because unfortunately my local pub is closed for 8 months, but I'm going to be watching it from another pub that I've come to like. Definitely going to be a very good weekend as always. But anyway, when we come back, we'll get into UFC 299, UFC 300, and a couple other things. All that and more when I come back. Just a clarification from my point before. That is when championship fights go to decision. Obviously, it's not when there's a knockout or a submission. It's when they go to decision. What did I say submission before? God. It's when championship fights go to decision. That is when there's either a hometown advantage or it goes to the champion's favor, usually. But there is one other thing I want to talk about briefly before I get into all the other topics that I want to talk about, and that is that it has been a year this month, as of, I think, February the 12th, or the 11th in America, since UFC 284, which was the first Volkan Islam fight, as I mentioned. I posted on our Twitter about it. Of course, was a historic card, the first Australian card since UFC 243 in 2019. It was in Perth in a big arena. You know, it was nostalgic, man. Gee, I wish I'd been able to go. But it was also historic for another reason, because it was, of course, the announcement of the Prime Hydration sponsorship, which has continued to this day. So it's been a year since that started. Gee whiz, where did the time go? And of course, Logan Paul and KSI were in attendance to celebrate it. And man, it's already been a year. Where did the time go? I got the memories come up the other day from when me and my mate were watching it in his then lounge room. Oh man, a year went just like that. Far out. But let's get on to what the last of what I want to talk about in this podcast, which is a couple of things. One is UFC 299 and UFC 300. Of course, UFC 299, Sugar Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera for the 135 division strap. Going to be very interesting. That is indeed. I believe there's some other fights on it as well. Oh, I think Dustin the Diamond Poirier's on it. That fight got made official and signed. That's going to be interesting, of course, which we'll talk about in its own podcast, so we won't speak about it too much. UFC 300, though, is shaping up to be very interesting indeed. Not quite as star-studded as I'd hoped it would be, and with all the Vince McMahon and WWE allegations that have come out and the Brock Lesnar stuff, which I won't talk about too much, it's now all but been confirmed that Brock probably won't be on it, which is a shame. I was kind of hoping I had a bit of a small hope that he would be, you know, because Dana did promise it to be a super fight. I mean, maybe it's just a different definition of the super fight nowadays. Maybe the UFC has moved on from the big three ticket sellers, which I'll talk about again in a minute. But yeah, it's interesting. Of course, there's still some good fights on it. Absolutely. It's stacked in its own way. You know, bloody Justin the Highlight Gaethje versus Max Holloway. My God, I'm excited for that. There's a lot of talk that Wei Lee might be on the card. Oof. Oh, man, that's going to be interesting. But the other thing I did want to talk about just briefly. Let me just look at the list to make sure I haven't missed out on anything. Oh, no, I have not. Speaking of watching people, I mentioned being a fan of Charles Sonnen. I'm also a fan of True Geordie, and he dropped an interesting video the other day. Go watch it if you're interested, because he talks about it in way better detail than me. But he talked about Dana White and Conor McGregor's and the UFC's war with each other. And he made some interesting points. Like, really, when I think about it, it has been really a 2-year back and forth, or possibly even more now, ever since Conor was injured and he's been out for so long. And look, some of it's absolutely down to his own antics and, you know, the steroids, whatever, and all that other stuff. But Geordie did make a good point. It definitely does seem like, you know, Dana doesn't care as much anymore. Whereas once upon a time, Dana would have bent over backwards to make a Conor McGregor fight. Now it's literally just, oh, we'll get around to it whenever we can. You know, Conor wanted to fight in December last year, apparently. Conor wanted to fight on UFC 300, apparently. Neither have happened. He's now, you know, trying to come back in the fall. Look, we'll see what happens there. But you do wonder, why has this happened? You know, and Geordie made some good points. Is it the UFC trying to stifle Conor so that he can't go off and be bigger somewhere else? Because I believe he's got 2 fights left on his deal. You know, is it just holding off on him because they don't want to pay him the money that he'll command, or just they're just willowing him down so that when he does come back, they could say, well, you'll fight who we want and you'll fight for the amount of money that we want. Could be all 3 of those things, but look, man, it's a shame. As Geordie said, I too did want to see Conor fight at least one more time, if for nothing else, so I could cover it on this podcast. But who knows if we'll get it or not at this point, really. I hope we do, but who knows. Geordie made another good point too. Poor bloody Michael Chandler. sitting out for I don't know how long. He probably could have had 4 fights by now, basically patiently waiting for the Conor fight. And who knows what that inactivity is going to do to him, you know. If I were him, I would have just kept fighting and just, look, whenever the Conor fight comes, it comes, you know. Don't sit out and wait for the Conor fight to happen. But anyway, man, you would hope that Conor Chandler does happen purely because of Tough and everything that went on there, and you know you need some clarification, I guess. But not clarification, closure, closure and clarification, I guess. But who knows? But look, honestly, who knows if we'll get it at this point, and who knows whose fault it is that we haven't got it. It's not Conor's leg at this point. That's titanium steel. It's not USADA, because the USADA isn't with the UFC anymore. So I don't know. Is it just Conor bloody still out partying and getting drunk? I don't know. But go listen to Geordie's video if you do want more information, because he definitely explains it a lot better than me. But anyway, guys, do hope you enjoy the fight and have a good weekend wherever you are. I'll, of course, be watching it at the pub, as I said. Going to definitely be a good one. And I am looking forward to the upcoming cards, including the historic UFC 300. Man, who could believe it's been that long? As I've always said, feels like yesterday me and my mates started watching again, and now it's UFC 300. Gee whiz. But anyway, as always, guys, as I said, enjoy the fight wherever you are. And till next time, as always, catches.